Thanks once again for joining our Alteryx Server Series, webinar series actually. So unfortunately, this is our last session, but of course, we are posting everything here that we are presenting to you to our YouTube channel. So please follow us there. Follow us on LinkedIn. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of content, not only related to Alteryx or Alteryx Server, but to other tools as well. So if you learn more about Alteryx Designer or Tableau or any other tool, we have a lot of content being developed on a daily basis. So I suggest you go in there, taking a look, you will actually learn a lot. So we'll be sharing also this webinar recording by email, all right? But that's about it. So let's get started. So as usual, my name is Fernando Vizcaino. I'm working here in the data mining enablement team. I'm an Alteryx ace working for 7 years with Alteryx, the one and only. So as always, I'm saying I'm in a serious relationship with Alteryx and planning to marry Alteryx actually. But let's go ahead, jokes aside. So today is our last session. We are going to be talking about the production process and also talking about analytical apps. So what actually means the production process? So, all right, you understand everything related to Alteryx Server, but now we need to connect Alteryx Designer to Server and start publishing the workflows there. And of course, for a lot of different tools there, the first time you try to connect is not as straightforward as it should be. So I'm here to help guiding you into have everything done if it's your first time connecting to the Alteryx server. All right. So starting our session, we are going to be talking about publishing workflows, opening workflows in Designer as well, all the interactions with your workflow in the gallery, but also in the Designer. We're going to be talking about scheduling workflows, versioning, restriction in the run mode, and also talk about data connections. Of course, a lot of these subjects we talked during our previous sessions, but the idea here is for me to show all the aspects from the gallery point of view, but also designer point of view. So we're going to be talking about credentials and how for you to show outputs in your gallery. And lastly, but not least, I'm going to giving you a high overview of an analytical app. So what that actually means and what that actually is as well. All right. So the first step, of course, is for you to add your gallery. So you need to open your Alteryx Designer. You go to your File tab, Save As, or Open Workflow. It doesn't really matter. And you need to add a gallery. From there, you're going to be seeing a pop-up like this. So here, actually, it can be HTTP, HTTPS, of course, depending on your certificate. Also, the URL and the certificate is all defined when configure the Alteryx server system settings, but it's usually like this. So it's your server name or IP / gallery, and that's what you need to fill in there. One thing that you always need to be aware is that your designer needs to have a version equal or lower than your Alteryx server. And also your permission level in the Alteryx gallery needs to be an artisan or higher. So it needs to be an artisan or a curator. In other words, a developer or an administrator. So what will happen here if you try to use a higher version of the Alteryx Designer, you're going to simply not connect. All right, so you're gonna try to connect. You're gonna stay in a page similar to this one. You're not gonna have any kind of error. It's gonna simply not connect to the Alteryx gallery. But of course, after connecting, let's say we have a workflow already created. My workflow here is this one, DP plus SD plus PA. And the first thing that you need to keep in mind is that Alteryx allows you to save workflows with the same name. All right, it's all based on a workflow ID. And if you remember our last session, we were talking about the gallery APIs, and you have an app ID related to your workflow, and that's basically it. So you can have the same name but different app IDs. The location here is always gonna be your private studio. All right, so that's why you need to be at least an artisan, and all the artisans has a private studio, or also you can have a private studio for a group of users. That works as well. You have the option here to include a tag, but of course this is basically when you have a multi-node environment and you want to tell Alteryx to run that workflow in a specific worker node. You can also include here details related to that workflow. So it's the first version, the second version, what you added there. So you can be including here. Okay. Of course, you have some additional options here that I'm going to be talking about later on the session. But let's move forward here. So, all right, so you have all configured here. After you press save, maybe you're going to experience something like this. So you can have different errors when you try publishing the workflow to the gallery, but basically it will be one of these three. So it can be that you don't have access to a data source or a folder, a share folder, right? So your user, the user that you are, that actually the user on the Alteryx server that is running your workflow doesn't have access to that data source or folder. You can have blocked tools. We're going to be talking about this during the run mode. But also, if you are using a macro and the Alteryx server is unable to find that macro. We are going to be talking about all of these errors and how to correct all of those, but keep in mind that this can happen for the first time you are saving a workflow. But of course, if you have no errors, everything's working, then you're going to have something like this. Of course, for both options here, the workflow is saved already to your private studio. When this first option, it's saying here that maybe you will have some issues when running to the gallery, and also this one was validated. So it was not run. It was that zero check that I talked, I think, the second or third session, then mainly looking for all the permissions, if you have all the permissions to use the specific tools, or you have all the tools in your workflow, but it's not actually running your workflow. But okay, after running, after saving your workflow, you can click here and view in browser, but also you can open your workflows from Designer. All right, so it's basically the same. Instead of saving as, you open, you go to that file tab, click on the open workflow, go to your gallery, and you'll see something like this. As you can see here, you have access to all the workflows in your private studio. As you can see here, I have my own private studio, but also I have some other places here. So I have something here from the enablement team. I have some workflows here that are public, and I have access to all of those. So everything that was shared with me, or if it's shared publicly, then I'm gonna be able to load that using Alteryx. The only detail there, and as you can see here, is in red. So right, you can open all of the workflows, but when you are saving the workflow, if you are open one that is not in your own private studio, then you're going to be creating a copy to your private studio. All right, so keep in mind that you can open all the workflows, but if you save that workflow, you'll only be able to create a version if you have that workflow in your private studio. And one other thing here, one other detail here is that you can see these folders, this related to versioning. And as you can see, I only have access to the versions if the workflow is mine. So if I'm the owner of that workflow, right? But moving forward, all right, so I saved the workflow to the gallery. And here we have a few options. So the first option when I have workflow in the gallery is, of course, to make a workflow public. And by adding tags, actually what I'm doing is including a workflow in a specific district. And everything there that I'm saying, so tags and districts and its relationship one to each other, one to another, actually, it's all defined by our gallery administrator. So if you don't have any tags here available for you to include, then maybe you need to ask your curator to start including those. You have the option to run, download, and schedule your workflows here. And any of these options can be disabled, and it's all depending on the configuration that your curator has set up here. So if you don't have the ability to run, to download, or to schedule, and you were supposed to have, then ask your curator. He'll know how to enable or how to give those permissions to you. You have ways here for checking all the login information and also the outputs from previous runs. So you can see here that you have everything related to your jobs, but also all the jobs that was shared with you. And for both of them, you will be able to see, for example, the login information. And as you can see here, it's very similar to the result tab on Alteryx Designer. So have all the information here, all the login information, but also you have the option to see previous outputs. So let's say, for example, that you want to look for output from 6 months ago. So you will be able to see that. So if it's a report, you can check that on the gallery, but also will be able to download that file or that report as well. Also, when you talk about scheduling, so for scheduling workflows, you have 3 different options natively on the gallery. So the first one is for you to run the workflow once. So as you can see here, of course, you need to specify a date and time, and the workflow will be run. You can also include some comments here related to why you are scheduling that. And you can select here the time zone as well. You have the option to schedule a workflow on a recurring basis. So you have the frequency here, you have everything related to the frequency, when it starts, the time zone, and if you have any kind of ending date, you can include that here. And you can see it's very similar. We can customize our schedule as well. So as you can see here in one example, I'm running the first day, the month, the 15th day in January and March. and everything else is very similar to the other ones. For all of them, you'll be able to set the priority and also to assign a worker. Of course, for these two, you need to have permissions to do that. And once again, if you don't have that, but you want to have, or you think you need to have, then you need to ask your curator for those. Always ask your curator for additional permissions. About workflow versioning. All right, so you are in your private studio and you have access to all the workflow versions, right? So here you can see the artisan that updated the version. You can see the version, the Alteryx designer version, as well as any comments here. That comment that I showed you when you were saving the workflow to the gallery, that's what will appear here. And of course, from here, you are able to select any version and you can download that manually, run that version, or publish one version, one older version, for example. So if I have, for example, here, the first one is your productionalized workflow, and the second one, the one you are developing, but it's not on prod yet, then you can leave the first one published and the second one here only for your developers to access it from Designer. And of course, you can include the comments here that it's still being developed or anything like that. You have the option here to replace a workflow. So remember when I said that in Alteryx, you are able to save workflows with the same name. So of course, that will happen. It happens to everyone there. But if you do that, one thing, instead of deleting the workflow and saving once again as a new version, one thing that you can do here, so we can find a workflow here to replace the customer acquisition. So let's say, for example, that this one, the workflow itself is a production workflow, and you are developing in a different workflow, everything else. So what you can do here, after finishing the development, then you can select that workflow here and replace this workflow with the most updated one. So that one option for you as a workaround if you save multiple workflows with the same name, as well as if you're replacing when thinking about development and production workflows. All right, it's only a matter for you to replace. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that the workflow versions of the replacement will not be preserved. So you'll see all the versions from this workflow, all the history from this workflow, but from this workflow, you only see the migration, the workflow itself with no information, no additional information. About restrictions. So of course you have the workflow settings there as well. So the first one, of course, if enabled the option for others to download this workflow, that means that you will have this button enabled. And the same goes for the run button. So if this is enabled, you'll see that the run button is enabled or is here as well. So I have the option as well for the workflow history. So if others are accessing your workflow and you have this enabled, then all the other artisans will be able to see your workflow versions and will be able to version in that workflow as well. You have the option here to check this workflow to be migrated. And we talked about this during the Gallery API session. And this is the first step for you to move a workflow from an environment to another. But you can use this option as well to move one workflow to from a private studio to another private studio. So if you have a user leaving the company, for example, and you don't want to do everything manually, to download all the workflows manually and migrate to another private studio, then you can use the migration workflow to do this kind of process. All right, and also you have here the option to assign a worker and the run mode, the restrictions in the run mode. So I have three options here: safe, semi-safe, and unrestricted. So of course here, as a default, it's all unrestricted. The gallery users can run the workflow regardless of tools or access. When you go to semi-safe, so that means that it's the Alteryx server is blocking that workflow from reading data or writing data to a location that is not inside the Alteryx server working directory. And you have also the safe option that is the same as the semi-safe, but you have many tools that you can't use. For example, the run command tool, the email tool, if I'm not mistaken, the fuzzy match tool, and you have a lot of other tools that you are unable to use when you are running this on a safe mode, right? But that's basically it. It's not that complex. You have an help tutorial showing all the tools, everything that is blocked in each of the modes. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the help page and see what is actually happening there between those modes. One thing that you can start doing as well, you can start leveraging gallery data connections. So here I'm showing a view from the input data tool. So when you open the input data tool, of course, have the option here to files, data sources, but have access to the gallery and all the connections that was shared with your user. It's all here. So for example, I have one here, FMV for MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server. Actually, it's only a matter for me to click here, and then I will be able to access that database. Of course, the idea here when you are working with gallery data connections is for you to have a unified and centralized management of all the connections from your company. You will be able also to share a connection without sharing its password. So that's another thing that is great as well. You can start sharing that connection. Of course, you share with all the users there. It's maybe if you have a lot of users, that can be very stressful, but you can also start sharing with groups. And those groups can be related to Active Directory groups. So you can start sharing that dynamically with all of your Alteryx developers if you have an Active Directory group for that. Rules that you need to keep in mind is that all the gallery connections are configured, created, and shared by the gallery administrator. And when you are working with these data connections, you must have the same ODBC driver as the Alteryx server. And also, if you're working with DSN, you need to also configure this DSN in your own machine. You're able to manage everything there related to your data connections. And what you see is something like this. So it's a place where you can manage all the connections that you have from both gallery and the ones that were configured by you. So you will not have permission to edit those gallery connections. So if you have any problem related to those connections, you always need to request your gallery administrator for helping with that. Okay, it's very simple. The only thing that you need to keep in mind, once again, that you have you need to have the same driver. And also, if you're working with DSN configuration, then you need to configure that with the same DSN name in your own machine. All right, moving forward here. So when saving the workflow, now we're going to be talking about the options there. So the first one, of course, we have two here. So if you don't want to publish that version of the workflow, you can uncheck this box. If you don't want to validate the workflow before saving, you can uncheck this box as well. But one thing that's very important when you are saving or publishing your workflow to the gallery is related to your workflow assets. And here, actually, you have two options. So have the options to package your workflow with your assets or to use share assets. So the first option there is related to packaging workflows. So when you are saving your workflow, you have assets associated with that. So you can have inputs, outputs, Alteryx macros. You can have data connections as well, aliases. But let's keep it simple and think about inputs, outputs, and macros. So right, so the first option there is for you to leave this box checked. So what you will actually be doing there is that you are saving your workflow, but you are sending also the files, both files here, your report and also your DBF file here together with your workflow. So when you run this workflow in the gallery, that means that you are reading a file that was copied to the gallery. So it's a static file. And for the outputs, it's a bit different, but if you pack your output together, that means that you want to show the output in the gallery. The second option there is that if you uncheck one box, so if you uncheck the box, that means that you are reading the file from its source. So it's not a static file anymore. It's been read from this place. And also for outputs now. So if you uncheck the output, that means that's going to be writing that output to the destination folder. And you won't be seeing that as a result in your Alteryx gallery. So right, so if you want to see your results and for the user to be able to download that asset, that output, but also you want to write the output to a share folder, then you need to have two output tools there. All right. But when you are working with share assets, you must use a share folder. And Alteryx Server needs to have access to that. So, of course, when you are publishing the workflow to the gallery and you are using a share folder, you already have access to that share folder. But it's not you that is running the workflow in the gallery. It can be the service account from the Alteryx gallery. It can be the run as permission. It can be the credentials saved on our private studio. Of course, you have a lot of steps there, a lot of levels of credentials, and we talked about that before. But the idea is that your Alteryx server needs to have access to that share folder. And also, when you are saving that to your gallery, it must be an UNC path. And that means it's not your own drive. It's going to be a network path here, similar to this. So it can be the name of your share folder, can be the IP of your share folder. It really doesn't matter, but it's basically like this. You have the option there to lock your workflow. That's one option that you have already on Designer. That's basically you are saving a workflow to the gallery and you don't want anyone else to be able to open that workflow. That means downloading the workflow manually or even opening from Designer, no one, not even you, will be able to open that workflow once again. So when you are locking that workflow, it's always great for you to save a backup file in a personal folder. But have also the option here to work with credentials. And that's one thing that you can do. All right, so if the service account from the Alteryx server doesn't have access to a share folder, then let's use credentials. And here you have three options. So by default, the workflow is running with the service account on the Alteryx server, but you have three options here. So I have the option here to run workflow using a different user login. And this, of course, commonly used, as I said, to control access to private data. That can be related to a data source. That can be related to a share folder. All right. And that's the credential of this specific page needs to be enabled by the server administrator. So you only have access to credentials if you have that option enabled by your admin. And here, so all right, so I have three options here. The first one, so you don't need to specify a credential. The second one, the user must specify their own credential. So you have an open box there to include a username and password. And you have the third option here. So the third option, it's not your own username. So it's actually related to the credentials shared with you. So have a drop down here with all the credentials that were shared was shared with you. So you will not be able to include your own here. It's not an open text, but it's a drop down for you to select between all the credentials that has been shared with you. All right, so now you know how the credentials work, you know how to publish your assets, but let's talk about showing output results in the gallery. So once again, we are on Designer here. So the first option, of course, all right, so you want to share an output with an end user. So want the user to have the ability to download a file from the gallery. So once again, you need to check the boxes when you are working with assets. And here, the only thing that you need to be aware is that if you want your server to show a sample of your output, you need to use a YXDB file. And what that means? So, of course, when you are in your gallery, you have the option here to download the file, but also if you are using a YXDB format, you will be able to see a sample here. But keep in mind that it's only a sample, all right? So you're not gonna be seeing the whole data set here. But of course, you have the option to show the whole data set here. And it's that what I'm gonna be showing now. So actually, the second option there, so if you want to show a table or a report to an end user, then you need to use the render tool. Of course, here it's a basic example where I'm including a simple table here. And when I use the render tool, if I want this to be shown in the Alteryx gallery, I need to use this mode. So to create a specific output file, and the file format need to be PC XML always. Of course, here you can save as a PDF, as an HTML, Word file, but those, of course, the user will be able to download, but the user won't be able to see that in the gallery. And that actually looks like this. So even for PC XML, you will be able to download this as a CSV file, all right? So that's not a problem. And here, it's not a sample anymore. it's the whole data set. So if I work in the Alteryx gallery, you need to start thinking about using the reporting tools for to start sharing those outputs to the end user. Of course, this is a simple example with a single table, a basic table, but of course, you can start creating customized reports. It's another basic example as well, but here, as you can see, we can start including mapping, spatial capabilities. We can now start including here charts or anything related to those reporting tools. So it can be all customized here, everything, even this text here, it's all customized. You can see here a 26 minutes trade area for a specific store. So it's all customizable. All right. And of course, for you to be able to customize this, so for example, the store 343, if you have the end user to select anything prior to running that workflow, that's when we start talking about analytical apps. Once again, on Designer, so for you to create an analytical app, it's very simple actually. So it's the same as if you are creating macros. So it's basically the first step there, create your workflow the same way as you would create without any kind of interface tools. So you have the workflow here, a simple example. It's a master file here. This is the data from this file. I'm filtering by the city. I'm sampling, selecting, multiplying that using a formula, and then outputting that to a file, a YXDB file. So that means that my user, if I save this to the gallery, will have access, will see a sample of my data set. So for you to start working or creating analytical apps, you need to use this category. So as you can see here, there are a lot of interface tools. So for example, checkboxes, dates, drop downs, file browse, numeric up and down, text box. So you have a lot of different ones there for you to start creating your form for the end user to fill prior to running that workflow. So the idea here is that, of course, you can start leveraging the Alteryx gallery to run your scheduled workflows, but now you can start using those workflows that you are building and sharing to end users with no knowledge whatsoever about Alteryx, but they will be able to start selecting anything from this workflow. So for example, let's say that a specific user is not interested in Colorado Springs, but is interested in, for example, here, Aurora. And actually the user doesn't want to have the whole data set and filter after in Excel. So what we can do here, so if you want to publish this to the gallery and allow the end user to filter this the way that he actually wants, then we can start thinking about the interface tools. So right, I have 5 different ones here: file browse, drop down, numeric up and down, listing box, and text box. So the next thing is that I need to connect these tools to my workflow, right? And that is by using action tools, all right? So here, it's the user interface. Here is what that user interface selection is doing to your workflow, to each of your tools. So the idea here is that it's all connected, all right? And of course, the file browse here. So, okay, so the user will need to provide a file before running the workflow. The user will select from a list. The user will select select numbers here. You choose a number. The user will have a list box with the columns to select that he wants in his output, as well as a text box here that can be a number for the user to multiply the total sales. All right, so when you talk about the action tool, this one here, so you have a lot of different action types, and that's all based on your interface tool as well as your tool here. So I have a lot of different ones. The most common one is for you to update a value, and with this option or any other option, the action tool, you'll be able to change anything in this filter. So if you are selecting from one column, if you want to change from seat to state, or if you want to change the name of the city, or if you want to change the condition, so it's not equal anymore, it can be contains, or it can be does not equal, or it can be is null. It can be anything in the tool, anything that you can do manually, you can do that with your action tool as well. All right, so what happens here when we go to the action tool, this is what we are seeing. So as you can see here, this is the action tool connects to a filter tool. You can see here that it's a filter. We have the mode here. So if it's the basic part of the filter tool, it's the simple mode. And as you can see here, we have the option to change the operator. We have the option to change its fields. And we have the option here. You can see a lot of options here related to dates. So if you are using dates, you can change anything related to dates as well as the value. So the value here is Colorado Springs, and that's what I'm replacing. And the replacement will be what the user is selecting from the gallery. All right, so this is the easiest way of using the action tool, but of course, you can start using formulas. So let's say, for example, instead of replacing Colorado Springs, you want to replace only Colorado and leave the Springs here. So you can use this option to replace a specific part of your string, as well as including any formula that you also have access in the formula tool. So if you want to, you have a complex string there and you need to use regex, be my guest, you'll be able to use that. All right, so if it's more complex than that and you need to go into the XML of your workflow, so all the workflows in the end of the day are XML files, then you'll be able to also update the raw XML with the formula. So I have a lot of different options there when thinking about the action tool. But also related to the user interface tools, here's an example. So for the drop down, I'm able to select the text or the question there. So in this example, I select the city. I have the option to manually set values. So as you can see here, all the cities are pasted here, but I have a lot of different options. And of course, this differs from one user interface tool to another, but it's all visual. So you will be able here, for example, to use external source as all the cities. So okay, so have a file with all the cities, all the states, everything that you need, then you can use that as your source here. And have a lot of different options here, but that's basically how you get started. All right, so you have configured all your user interface tools, you have configured all of your action tools, and now you have the last portion here, the last step. So after creating your workflow, it's all configured. You don't know yet if it's working, but it's configured. Then you need to go here to the interface designer. There, you will be able to start designing your form there. As you can see here, I can write here anything that I want. I can start moving around here. I can include new tabs. I can start grouping. So I have a few components here that will make your user interface prettier. It will look better. One additional thing, very advanced thing that you can use here. So instead of using the interface designer, you'll also be able to use HTML as your user interface, right? So you have a lot of options here to make this look good. But the whole idea here is that after you creating the form here, you can publish this to the gallery. But once again, you don't know yet if it's working, right? So we have one additional step here. So the second icon here, the magic wand, and it's really magic actually. So here you can test your app and see what is actually happening inside those action tools. So the idea here, all right, so as an example, I'm filling my file, I'm filling the city, everything is filled, and then it's only a matter for me to open debug. After doing that, actually, you'll see something like this. So as you can see, we don't have user interface tools anymore. We don't have those action tools, but it was created a debug file. You can see all the login information, but here everything was replaced. So if I have a filter to a different city, it's here already. So it's all replaced. It's only a matter of you running this workflow and see if that is working. And this is very useful. For example, if you have a very complex regex expression or anything that you are unable to test, then you'll see that replacing anything here. So see what is actually happening when replacing the city, or if you have a complex formula there replacing something, then you can check to see what is actually working there for a fact. All right. So after running this, it's all validated, it's all working. Now you can publish to your gallery. There, this is what your end user will look. So the idea here is that, all right, so have an analytical app here. We can include all the descriptions here, app, anything whatsoever. But the idea is now the user, the end user with no knowledge of Alteryx development will be able to select his own file, select the city, and decide if that will create a report or a file for him to download. Or it can be an email sent to anyone there. So you have a lot of different possibilities here when working with analytical apps. All right, so actually for today, that was everything I have for you. So I think now, of course, after this, all of these sessions, you can now understand how to work. I hope that you understand how to work with Alteryx Server. You understand the different capabilities, the different responsibilities between admins, artisans, end users, and also here a very important one: how to connect everything and how to understanding how to publish the workflow and how to work with the errors that you might have there when you are publishing a workflow. If you have any questions there, be my guest. I'm gonna be answering a few here. But once again, thanks a lot for attending. It was almost 2 months of sessions, Wednesday sessions. I know that you miss me. I will miss you as well. But once again, as a reminder, so please follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a lot of content there. I'm there, as well as a lot of other consultants are publishing everything related to Alteryx. All the questions that you see in the community and you don't know how to proper answer that, we are answering those using videos, using practical workflows here, examples. All right.
Fernando, it does look like we have a couple questions in the chat. So I'm going to take a look at those and we can tag team the answers on those. So I can
Sure.
take the first one from Dylan. Dylan, yes, you can schedule analytics apps. There's a couple ways of going about doing that. So it depends on what parameters you're putting in. You can field those in as part of the schedule. It is going to be looking for some of those parameters to be fed in. The other thing you can also do is schedule the run via an API. So an API call will allow you to submit the files if there's files associated with that. So you've got a couple different options that exist there. And when we talk about scheduling apps, one of the common questions I ask myself is, are there ways in which we can allow those apps to be submitted where we can collect the information one time and then just schedule it like a normal workflow. So the key thing that I would look at from a research perspective, if I were you, is a YXWB. So those are the app values that exist. So if you're studying for like your core exam, you'll see that as one of the file values. And whenever you go to set up a analytics app, if you're in the designer and debug mode, or you even open up the app using the little magic wand, you'll notice there's a little save icon there, and that'll generate that save fields file, and that'll allow you to run those workflows there. I think probably the best example, if you have access to this, is take a look at the starter kit for Connect, and they have the setup there where they kind of walk through actually running a series of workflows in that manner related to the metadata loaders. Fernando, did you want to take the one from Jay?
I think it's better you take that.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure. I'm not that sure.
Yeah, so when we talk about the Alteryx gallery, that's all part of the Alteryx server, right? So that is separate from your designer instance. So if you're purchasing the server or you have server today, then that means you have gallery. So the gallery is just the web-based portion of the Alteryx server. So Jay, hopefully that answers your questions. And then if you have questions on how to get your hands on an Alteryx server, again, feel free to message us, connect with Fernando and I on LinkedIn as well. We can help get you the right people or even help you find out who your Alteryx rep is if you had any questions and wanted to set up a demo, etc. The other thing that I would say, if you just want to get exposure, to the Alteryx gallery, is with every designer instance, obviously you have access to the Alteryx public gallery. Now, when we discuss this, the public gallery does mean it's public, like to the entire world. That is actually going through a transition right now. They're going to embed it in the community. So whenever you go to gallery.alteryx.com, if you have workflows there, I would recommend taking a look at that because you may want to pull them down as they will be discontinuing the use of gallery in its current state and embedding that into the community. So Jay, thank you for the question on that. And then Aaron asking, could you show what the render tool configuration looks like to use the PXML files so that the sample is available and can be downloaded in other formats like CSV? I think we can do a video on that, Aaron. I don't know if you have a workflow available this quickly, Fernando. What I would say is, Aaron, if you want to follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn, we can set up a video for that. And Alan, I would say we can push that one to the front of the list. Aaron, it can be done. So as soon as you do PXML, there's a drop-down box that's available for the end user to pick whichever format that they want. And the and the CSV is one of those outputs that's always defaulted. And then Jay's asking, I have on-premise Alteryx Designer. Does that mean I have access to the Alteryx gallery too? Yes, it does. The public gallery, everyone who has a designer instance has access to it. You may be blocked by your security settings, but that would be related to your company. So if you're in a highly secured environment, you may not be able to access it. You would know if you didn't have access to the internet, basically is all you need. And it will ask you for your community login. So if you haven't set that up, it's all SSO now. So if you've ever logged in and grabbed your download for installation, then that means you have the sign-in. It'll be the same one across the board. And when we talk about the Alteryx gallery as Fernando was sharing it, that is a private server. So you would have to purchase a private server in order to do some of the things that he was discussing, like using the gallery APIs. Great questions.
All right, everyone. So I think that's it for today. Thanks once again for attending these webinars. We are going to be sharing the videos with you by email, but also posting to our YouTube channel. Have a nice day, everyone.